Good morning, everyone. Thank you all for joining us at this early hour. It's not that early, but in any case, thank you for joining us for what is the last of the university workshops that we are organizing with work package 7 of the FAIRsFAIR project. We're very much looking forward to today's event, which is about the practical implementation of FAIR-related content in university curricula and teaching. A big part of the meeting today is going to be about presenting and working with you in terms of the adoption handbook for FAIR and RDN that we've been developing in our work package. We're really looking forward to discussing it with you. And before we get there, I'm going to hand over the floor to my colleague Federica Garbuglia, who is first going to give us a bit of a context, bit of an introduction to what this project is about and what this work package is trying to achieve within that project. So with that being said, on behalf of the FAIRsFAIR project, work package 7, and also on behalf of the European University Association and University of Göttingen, welcome to today's event. And with that being said, Federica, the floor is all yours.
Thank you, Brecht. So as my colleague mentioned, this event is organized as part of the FAIRsFAIR project. So if my slide moves, I wanted just to give you a background of what is the FAIRsFAIR project and what are our aims, and also about our work package 7 that we are part of. So the Fostering Fair Data Practices in Europe, the Europe project started back in 2019. And these are actually the very last months of this project, because we are going to end our work next year in February. And we are now in the final stretch of our work within FAIRsFAIR, with the biggest deliverable being produced and made available to the wider public at the end of this year. And the adoption handbook for FAIR will be one of these last deliverables. The FAIRsFAIR project is a very broad project. So this is an overview of all our work packages, and we are located, as we mentioned, in the work package 7 on fair data science, curricula, and professionalization. Among the different work packages, our work packages aims to bring the project results closer to universities. And here are the objectives of the work package, and you can really see how during these 3 years we try to map the situation on what is currently fair data education in Europe and in universities, and we try to address how we could enhance the uptake of fair data skills and fair data competencies among universities. I will not go through all the objectives now, but since we are talking today about the adoption handbook, it will target the two last points that you see here in these slides, because the adoption handbook will offer model courses and curricula for fair data education that universities can use to enhance the uptake of these skills within their programs. Here you have a more visual representation of the work package progress, and this slide is very important to us because it really shows how our work now in these last few months is really based on what we have done before in the past years. So you can see here that the two deliverables that we have ahead of us are the adoption handbook, but also a good practices report, where we will gather good practices from European and also extra-European universities that have implemented the training courses or teaching courses on fair data and research data management in their curricula at the Bachelor, Master, and Doctoral level. And the two big deliverables, so the adoption handbook and the good practices report, will be complementary reports that both of them can be used by universities as practical tool to integrate fair data skills, but also fair data material in their programs. And these two were based on previous deliverables that are all available in the FAIRsFAIR website. And this includes a survey where we map the landscape of fair data education in Europe, desk research on different competencies framework for fair competencies, and our own FAIRsFAIR competence framework framework that we had the chance to present at different events, whose recording is also available in the FAIRsFAIR website. So this is our work within work package 7 of FAIRsFAIR. And now I give the floor back to my colleague Breck for the little bit an overview of the agenda of today.
Yeah, thank you, Federica. So that was a great introduction, I think, to the project, to the work package and the objectives. And the takeaway here for today is that of the 2 big deliverables that we'll be delivering very shortly before December 2021, we have an adoption handbook and a good practice report. And today the focus really is going to be on the adoption handbook. It's in a very advanced state already. A lot of work has been done. So we're very happy to finally bring to you what is I think a close to final version of what we hope to deliver by the end of the year. That being said, close to final does not mean absolutely final. A big thing in today's meeting is also we want to hear from you, your views, and how we could still make some improvements with the time that we have left. And in the agenda, you see that objective reflected. We're going to start off with Claudia Engelhardt from the FAIRsFAIR project and University of Göttingen in Germany, who's going to be presenting the adoption handbook, how it is today. And then also to start to ease into, I think, the discussion with all of you, the participants, we also invited 3 speakers to reflect on not just the adoption handbook, but their own lived experience at their own institutions and how the adoption handbook could potentially help them take FAIR and RDN forward. So we're looking forward to that as well. I will now give the floor to my colleague Claudia, and then I will come back to introduce the other speakers. So Claudia, the floor is all yours.
Yes, thank you, Brecht, and hello and welcome from my side as well. I'm glad to be able to present a more or less advanced and pre-final version of the handbook to all of you today. Let me share my screen. Okay, can you see my screen now? I'm going to switch between the draft document on Google Docs and the mural board here. So can you see me switching around?
We can see you switching, yes.
Okay, that's great. So first of all, a very brief, and I really try to be brief and not go too much into detail, very brief history of the handbook. So this is the fourth deliverable of this training work package, education and training work package with a focus on higher education institutions, specifically in the FAIRsFAIR project. And Federica mentioned earlier, okay, let me switch to here. Federica mentioned earlier that, I'm going to, sorry, this is a bit, I'm going to use this mural board for presenting also, which is sort of an experiment. So I hope it goes well. So Federica mentioned earlier, can you see my cursor, by the way? No one's answering.
Yes, we can see it.
Okay, great. So that we already produced the FAIR competence framework for higher education, developed earlier in the project, which is a rather high level, very comprehensive framework trying to cover all competences, knowledge, skills, and so forth that are required, with a special focus on the data stewardship profession, So, and accompanying this framework, we created the handbook that we're going to present today to break down this framework into material, guidance, and so forth that is firstly focused on higher education, and specifically on bachelor, master, and PhD students of all kinds of disciplines. So not specifically for data-related professions or data stewardship or computer science or data science programs. So, and the approach that we chose to develop this handbook or create this handbook was actually a book sprint that was undertaken in June of this year. So we had 6 book sprint sessions, and we had a number of participants, about 35 participants in the book sprint. You can see all their names here on the title page. So it's really a lot of people that were involved in this. We had a call before we did the book sprint. So the people applied, there was a vetting process, and I can say everyone involved in this is really an expert in the field. There was a lot of expertise gathered, and yeah, we were very lucky to have this. Yeah, so the first very rough draft of the handbook was developed during 6 sessions in early June by the people listed here. I'm going to scroll down a bit and you see the rest of the names. There was an editorial process following that, where we finalized the first draft, and this was presented then to the wider community for a public consultation, which ran from the end of July to the 12th of September. And we really did get a lot of feedback, which again, we were very happy about and are grateful for. So you can see the names of the people who contributed in this context here, and I believe some of them are also in the audience today. So this is a chance to, in person, although just virtually, say thank you to you. Your contributions are very much appreciated. Yeah, we got a lot of suggestions and feedback this way, which we then subsequently incorporated in the handbook. And this led to the version that we're going to present today. So back to the mural board. So just to recap, I briefly mentioned this, I think, in the beginning. What's the target audience of the handbook? So the focus is really higher education institutions and all the people that are involved there in the planning, organization, realization of teaching and training on the FAIR principles specifically, and also research data management in general, because the FAIR principles are often taught in conjunction with research data management, which makes sense, of course. So, of course, in some higher education institutions, FAIR is already being taught, but there are also many institutions that are still at the beginning. And we are hoping that the handbook will help them to progress towards more integration of the FAIR principles in their teaching programs. So people involved in planning, organization, realization of teaching, who are these, for example. So there are different roles and a number of people on certain levels involved in this. So there are people creating and teaching lessons and courses, firstly, of course. So lecturers, for example, professors, trainers. Then there are people one level higher, more or less, designing, implementing, and adapting curricula for programs, for study programs. So, for example, doctoral program managers or deans. There are also people focusing more on PhD students and early career researchers. Often these are support staff members from the library, for example, but also lecturers and trainers who do training for these student groups. And finally, of course, there's a whole institutional framework around the teaching of strategies, policies, administrative processes, and so forth, where on a lot of different levels, FAIR or the FAIR principles have to be implemented somehow. And there are a large number of people and roles involved in this as well. So for example, we have vice rectors or vice presidents. So the titles, I think, are different from country to country, institution to institution, for research or offices of research, but also, for example, data protection officers and other people on the management and administrative level. So I wanted to stress this. So these are really the main groups that this handbook is targeting, because there are already a lot of guidelines and there's a lot of material out there that is dealing with FAIR and teaching and training for FAIR. But a lot of the times the focus is really on data stewards and researchers. But we really want to see or to create something that is specifically focusing on higher education institutions and students. So let me zoom out a bit. Now, because now I want to give you a very quick overview of the 4 main chapters of the handbook and just introduce a bit what they are all about. So we have, so the 4 main chapters are firstly dealing with the definition of FAIR skills and competences for the bachelor, master, and PhD level, here in yellow in the upper left. And then next to it in the green box, teaching and training designs for FAIR, which is focusing more on, okay, how do I go about creating or designing a course or a lesson? Then in the bottom left, in the blue box, FAIR lesson plans. These are really short 3-4 page plans that give a rough outline for lessons on different FAIR topics. And then lastly, we have a chapter that is dealing with implementing FAIR on the institutional level. So which is a bit deviating from the teaching topic, but is also a necessary framework to support researchers and students in implementing or in implementing the skills and knowledge they learned about FAIR from the institutional side. Okay, so defining FAIR skills and competences, let's zoom in there. So this is, or the aim here was, and I have to be mindful of the time I see, to sort of like design competence sets of the skills, knowledge, and so forth that is necessary for students on the bachelor, master, and PhD level. And this was the first step that we did in this regard. And in the second step, for those competences or knowledge units or topics that we deemed entry-level content, we also defined learning outcomes. And if we go to the document, the handbook document, I'll just briefly show you what's in there in this regard. So we have first here the competence profiles. So you see the topics that we deemed relevant on the left side, and these are about, this table has about 2.5 pages. So you see here on the left side all the topics, and then and it's lagging a bit. I probably have to switch to Google Docs. Sorry, that is going so slow. And here, columns for the bachelor, master, and PhD level. And for each of these, we try to define the level of the skill that is required for the bachelor, master, and PhD students. And it also tells you, okay, is this entry-level content or not? So we have this table of the competence profiles. And if we scroll down a bit, in addition to that, we have tables with the entry-level content and the learning outcomes that we have defined for those. So you see here the entry-level content for the bachelor level. So for example, the first one is general principles and concepts in data management. And you see there's one big learning outcome that is relevant for the bachelor level here. Okay, let's go back to the mural board and look at the second topic, teaching and training designs for FAIR. And the main element here is a breakdown of the elemental phases in course design and what is necessary there to get to a course. So the first step is select or identifying learning outcomes, which in addition to the learning outcomes that we defined in the chapter before, give an overview of important features that a good learning outcome or a useful learning outcome should possess. Then we have one section about how to develop or select learning experiences. So a learning experience means basically a type of delivery or delivery formats. So we give an overview there of possible delivery formats and the pros and cons that are related to these. Then the next step, of course, is to select content relevant to the learning outcomes, and in this respect, there are some general considerations to make, but also in terms of the FAIR principles, one has to think about the question, okay, how exactly are we tackling FAIR and the integration of FAIR into existing courses, for example, or how are we going about to teach it in a coherent way? And there are different strategies or approaches that one can follow. So for example, you can say, okay, I go by the letters. First, I introduce everything necessary to make data findable, and then the accessible part and so forth. You can also do it another approach along the research life cycle. You could link it to data management plans, or if your students have specific need or previous knowledge, you might also choose to do it according to individual needs. And I'm mindful of the time. I try to speed up, but not talk too fast. And then, of course, it's also about developing assessments to measure the progress towards the learning outcomes, and in the end, evaluate course effectiveness. So let's go on to the FAIR lesson plans. So these are really designed to be a useful tool that can be used more or less immediately by people to integrate them in their courses. So we have lesson plans on 16 topics, although one is still work in progress and not accessible yet, but we are hoping to finish this and add it for the final version. These are all following the same scheme, more or less. So in the beginning, they list the relevant FAIR principles, then the audience or the primary target audience of this topic or lesson plan. There is a summary of tasks and actions that are suggested to be followed in a lesson or course on this topic. It talks about the materials and equipment that is necessary. Then there are references where teachers or people using the lesson plans can find more information about the things referred to in the summary of tasks and actions. And most of them also have one take-home task or take-home tasks defined. And let's have a brief view on the topics. So we have one on FAIR in a nutshell, which is basically an overview or introduction to FAIR, data management plans, documentation, data creation, file formats, and metadata. And there are more topics here: data standardization and ontologies, PIDs, licensing, copyright, IPR, data reuse, repositories, and even more topics. I'm not going to read all of them now, but I wanted to give you a brief, and I have to go back to this box because this has the link. Just show you one of the plans just very quickly. And I'll hurry up because I'm already over time. Is that still okay, Brecht? I'll be done in 3 minutes. So
that's perfect. Thank you.
Okay. So, and this is one of these lesson plans. So you have the topic defined here, which FAIR elements are relevant. So for FAIR in a nutshell, it's all of them. Primary audience, the learning objectives. Oh, I forgot to put these on the sticky note, right? Or did I just not mention them? The learning objectives, of course, are defined as well. Here's the summary of tasks and actions. So what to do in a lesson about this topic. What's necessary, which equipment, computer, laptop, internet browser, and the references here. And this one apparently doesn't have a take-home task, but there are a lot of tasks that can be done here during the lesson. Okay, going back to the mural board and briefly going through the last chapter, implementing FAIR. So I'm just gonna mention the subchapters there. Firstly, of course, how do you get the FAIR principles into institutional policies? So there's a lot of information about this there. Then data management, planning, and FAIR. Data processing and documentation. Support infrastructure, of course, is important too. And then there is one subchapter on data publication. Right, so this was a brief introduction of the handbook. 2 things I wanted to mention, or specifically one again. So we are hoping to get some more feedback on this new version from you today. So we are integrating this feedback in the, we'll be integrating it in the weeks to come. And we'll release the final version of the handbook in December. And this will be a release as a project deliverable PDF on Zenodo. But we also plan a book publication in the beginning of next year. And we also, or in addition, want to release it as a Git book that is then probably in the future easier to update by volunteers. Okay, and that's it from my side. Sorry for running over time. Yeah, I hope this doesn't cause trouble for the further course of our event today.
No worries at all, Claudia. Thank you so much.
Yeah,
yes?
no, nee, nicht erneut, Frau. Stop. Okay.
Yes. No, thank you for presenting the adoption handbook, Claudia. I think, as announced, this is a deliverable that will be submitted before the end of the year. But I think you can already see from this presentation the amount of work that has been put into this adoption handbook already. It's very close to final. I think the shape is clearly there. We see where this is headed. So we're hoping that within that sort of very established framework, there is now a good opportunity to also engage with you, the participants today, in terms of what are your expectations? Where do you still see some gaps maybe? Where would you like us to push this a little bit further? But before we get there, we have 3 more speakers to reflect from their institutional setting what they are working on, but then also how this adoption handbook might be relevant to them. And with that being said, I'm going to give the word to Hugh Shanahan, who is part of the FAIRsFAIR project, who's also related to the Royal Holloway University of London in the UK, and very much looking forward to him presenting. Hugh, we know you have a very busy day, so thank you so much for joining, and the floor is all yours.
Yeah, apologies. Thank you, Brecht. Okay, so the good thing is Claudia did a really, really excellent introduction to what's covered in the handbook, and I just also to say plaudits particular to Claudia. This is a joint work. Many people have been involved in this, but Claudia has really been the person sort of on top, kind of guiding everybody. And you know, this is so a particular word of thanks to her for getting this developed. Okay, so what the other good thing is that because Claudia has done a really, really good introduction to what's being covered right now in the handbook, I'm going to be, well, frankly, a little bit more lazy and give more of see things in a kind of broader perspective. I will. So what if I can, I'll just share my screen now. Give me just a moment. Right. Hopefully everybody can see my screen.
Yes.
Thanks very much. Sorry for going blank on you. Okay, there we go. All right, so what I'm going to do is give two perspectives on this, which is most of my time I'll talk about the perspective of the training that we've been doing within FAIRsFAIR, but also I'll give an impact from where I'm actually based, which is at a university on the west side of London, close to Heathrow Airport, called Royal Holloway, which is part of the University of London Federation, and in particular the steps that are just starting there. All right. Okay, so in the first instance, I want to talk about the FAIRsFAIR activities. So in a separate work package, there's been a set of work focusing on getting training done. I won't talk about the CODATA RDA schools that are supported by FAIRsFAIR, but I will talk about the one which is particularly relevant here, which is the data steward instructor training. The structure of that after a number of iterations is to converge on an online workshop, which run three half days that run over a week. And they cover a variety of topics, which is introduction to RDM, open science and FAIR, pedagogy, because data stewards need to teach a lot, open and responsive research, DMPs, also service models as well. I forgot to add that. So far, these workshops are very much run on a regional basis. So, and here's just a quick snapshot of the kind of the program that we have. If on the link that's there, it points to the where you can find these timetables. As I said, they're run very much on a regional basis. In total, we've run six of them, 4 of them in Europe, another 2 outside of Europe. And we have 2 more open events, which are actually, if people are interested, there's October the 15th is the deadline for application. Now, there were a few things that kind of came out from that this session. As I said, what became very clear was that what we can do in this period of time in 3 half days is relatively limited. So much of what we're doing is actually building communities and this kind of came out of discussions with people kind of all across Europe. And I'm going to show you 2 slides, which are sort of summarizing 2 kind of key findings here, which I think should chime with many people, which is, in the first instance, data stewards, or at least people who do the roles which are equivalent to data stewards, are for the most part very, very new to this role. So here came from Menti surveys that we did for the event in Ghent and Ireland, North. And we see that the vast majority of people have been working in this, well, not the vast, but a majority of people have been working in this particular role for less than 6 months. So they really have just been, they're in there, they're getting started. The other discovery was that for the most part, they're also working in either on their own or in a small team. So here, really, the majority of them are either just on their own, or they really are sitting in a team of, say, 2 to 5, in a team of 2 to 5 people. And by that, I mean, they have other people who are doing data stewardship activities. So we can see a landscape where higher education institutions have, individuals recently employed, often in small teams. So it's really, really important that they realize that they have peers which are just down the road that they can talk to. And this, I think, is really an important discovery that we have about the present landscape. Let me also talk now about things more from a kind of an institutional basis, in terms of, I've spent 2.5 years being in FAIRsFAIR, but I work in a computer science department in a university in the UK. And after 2 years, I kind of realized, I better start practicing what I'm preaching. So in that respect, I wanted to talk about the landscape of where we are within the UK. An important initiative, which is very much researcher-led, is something called the UK Reproducibility Network, which is, it's been in existence for a number of years now. It's sort of dominated by people working in psychology because of the issues that came out there with respect to reproducibility, but it's rapidly expanded. So we see UKRN is represented, has representatives in HEIs across the UK, and this is really very much, there are many, many institutions that are there. Now, since the summer of this year, we set up a discussion group for HEIs in the west of London. And again, to stress, this is very much researcher-led rather than sort of data steward-led. Here's just a quick map to sort of show where we're at. So you can see sort of London up here. So you're getting it's west of London is more like the average position roughly. So we include people in, say, Reading and down on in the University of Sussex as well. And as you said, there's only been 2 meetings so far. But one of the things that's very notable there is the issue of materials. There's people want to actually share materials and saying, well, we want to get people trained up. Now, this will include a wide range of things, broader, much broader than FAIR, but certainly FAIR would be part of that, okay? So let me now kind of just come to some conclusions here. And again, sort of try and bring these findings into the relation of how does the handbook fit into this? One thing that I think that struck me over having conversations over the last few years with various institutions and so on is a phrase that keeps on cropping up in these conversations, which is, somebody kind of very quietly, I'll be talking away about these sorts of, about FAIR, about open science and so on. And then there's this slightly anguished tone that comes from somebody, and they say, well, you have to understand, my institution is really, really far behind everyone else. Now, the amazing thing is that this phrase kind of keeps cropping up in various orientations in many, many institutions. So what we have is kind of the opposite of there's a satirical book called Lake Wobegon Days. And in that there was this phrase which was, in Lake Wobegon, every child is above average at school. And, somehow everybody kind of seems to think that they're below average in this, in the context of FAIR. So having a handbook, being able to hand over to people and say, here you go, this is the current mode of thinking, provides an important step forward. It really means, okay, look, these are achievable goals that you can do and you can get up to speed. This is not rocket science. We've seen the data stewards are, as you said, they're new to their roles, they're relatively isolated. Building communities is really important there. And the FAIR Adoption Handbook will give that a really, really useful reference point for data stewards to work together on. All right, so they really can say, okay, this is something that we're all there. And having set up these nascent communities, we can share this among these communities. And I think this is something that's going to be very, very helpful for them. With respect to researcher-led initiatives, what seems to be, again, the problem is everybody is sort of at a stage where they're saying, they're much more confident, but on the other hand, they're also saying, well, we don't have any particular materials. Can we share stuff? And everybody's kind of knocking on everybody else's door. So in particular, having lesson plans in these topics, that's going to be really useful, because we can then say to people, go make use of these and run with them. So just the last thing I'll say is that here are the people that I've been working with in particular on this project over the last 2.5 years. And again, I just want to express my thanks to them all. Okay, so with that, I'll stop sharing and pass things back to you, Greg.
Thank you, Hugh, for coming in and sharing all of that, because it's what I really like about this presentation. And I'm going to invite anyone to ask questions in the chat, even though you do have to go, and we'll try our best to answer them on your behalf. But I really like how you bring in with this presentation also, not just where we are in terms of policies, but really sort of the mindset of how do people feel about this, the sense of isolation. Also, everybody feels like they're below average. I think that's an important part of the discussion also, in terms of just finding each other and realizing that there is a lot available and a lot happening, and people are more far further advanced than they sometimes think. So thank you for that presentation. I'm mindful of the time, so I'm just going to go straight on to our second presenter, Margareta Hellström from Lund University in Sweden. Margareta, the floor is all yours.
Yes, thank you very much, Brecht. Can you see my slide?
We can see your slides.
Excellent. So thank you very much for this opportunity to give you everyone a little bit of a snapshot of what we are doing at Lund University, sort of preparing for FAIR here. And before I move on, I just want to mention that my colleague Maria Jonsson, who is also present at the workshop here, she is very much more involved in this than I am. So I'm sure that Maria can help answer any questions in the chat and also in the breakouts later. Okay, so how can we potentially use this adoption handbook in our practices at Lund University? That was sort of the question I was asked to reflect over. So let me see if I can give you some indications of that. No. Yes, so just a few brief words about Lund University. So we were founded in 1666, so that's quite a long time ago, and we're actually the second oldest university in Sweden. And that has some implications on how we are working with anything, including fairness. I'll come back to that in a second. We're fairly large. We have about 44,000 students, 8,000 staff, and 2,800 PhD students. So there's a lot of people involved in research and, of course, also in education. We have a wide range of activities, not only in research, but of course, then also in teaching and education. We're organized into 9 faculties, as you can see on this list here. And one of the aspects of being a very old university is that there are a lot of traditions involved, and the ways of working are sort of ingrained in specific ruts, etc., and traditions. And that can make it a bit of a challenge to try to start talking, even having a dialogue about things like fairness, open data, open science, and specifically how you should implement things in your organization in order to support that. And of course, make sure that not only our staff, but also all the students that we are teaching are aware of these things. But apart from the normal faculties and the normal departments and things going on at the university, I also want to mention that Lund is a host to a number of large research facilities, including 2 accelerator labs. We also have a number of centers and institutes which are sort of there on not only for Lund, but some of them with a national and or even regional or European importance. And not the least, we are also hosts of or participants in several research infrastructures, both national and European. So if I try to summarize a couple of important points about the way that we are talking about dealing with and working with the research data management at the university, we of course, if we start at the top of the administrative level, we have a research board, which is sort of directly under the vice chancellor and the leadership of the university. So they are discussing many aspects related to research, and fairness and research data management practices, of course, also falls into their remit to talk about and formulate visions and strategies at different levels. And of course, also in the end, to make recommendations about investments into tools or other programs and things. Then we have a central library, which is the university library at sort of the top level of that. And that's where we have at the moment located our so-called data access units, which is there to help support, organize, contribute with information, etc., about research data management, targeting everyone at the university, really. The faculties, the researchers, the departments, and also anyone who is employed by the university. But the most daily activities are really happening out at the faculty libraries, and these more or less autonomous faculties, they make their own decisions about what is important, what activities they should concentrate on, and of course, the topics of the information and the support that is given to researchers and students differs a little bit depending on disciplines and what is required in different fields of research. They also help organizing training, and they organize seminars, etc. Then we have the departments under the faculties. Some departments are more active than others in providing, well, first of all, a floor for discussion around research data management, but then in certain cases, organizing seminars, others organizing training events, etc. And then last but not least in this list, as I mentioned before, we have these facilities and research infrastructures, and many of them are operating data centers or repositories, and there's quite a lot of best practices and expertise there in their day-to-day work, of course, being their own data stewards. And I think it's very important to be able to link up all of these main actors so that we can cooperate where it is possible and also learn from each other. Then I also wanted to mention that Lund University is one of the consortium members of the Swedish National Data Service, and that also, of course, means that there's a lot of knowledge exchange going on. There are data stewardship training activities, etc., that take place on a national scale, and where Lund is also involved in different ways. Let's just give one example of training that is happening in Lund with great relevance for building awareness and spreading the knowledge about FAIR and research data management in general. So I'm talking here about the course that I'm actually involved in myself teaching, also together with Maria and other colleagues. It's called Introduction to Practical Data Management and is targeting graduate students mainly from the Faculty of Science and also to some extent from the Faculty of Technology in Lund. And you can see that this is a cooperation between staff from the Department of Physical Geography and Ecosystem Science, but also with strong contributions from the libraries and also from the Carbon Portal, which is a data center of one of these research infrastructures called ICOS. So here we are bringing together people from different backgrounds, people from research, people from libraries and information sciences, etc., and also people more involved in data curation, etc., to give and present this course, and of course also to build up the training materials. We've given this course 3 times, once on campus in 2019 and the last 2 years virtually due to the corona crisis, of course. Each time with about 20 graduate students on board, and we've also had quite a few staff members from the Faculty of Sciences libraries attending also to learn and to share knowledge with the graduate student participants. You can see a link here. I'll share, of course, the presentation afterwards. And from the list of the topics that we cover that you can see here on the slide, and if you compare that to the adoption handbook, you can see a large overlap. So we are talking, of course, about the FAIR principles and what they mean in practice, but we also try to cover all these background things like metadata standards, best practices for collecting data, how do you use PIDs, and how do you cite data. And a very central part is actually how to prepare a data management plan. And so it's a mix of theory and then very practical things that the students can really use in their own activities in the research group. So my final slide here, how can we use the adoption handbook? Well, I think it is going to be a great resource at many different levels of our organization. All the way up from the top, where this research board and its members, I'm sure that they could learn a lot of things and get a more general picture of FAIR and research data management. We can also use it as guidance for training developers, a source of inspirations for trainers and support staff. And I hope that we will be able to, together with Maria, to organize a couple of seminars where we can actually delve into specific topics. So with that slide, I'm saying thank you for now. Please give questions and comments in the discussion here or contact me directly. Thank you.
Thank you for that presentation. Really interesting, really nice also to see the reflection on the adoption handbook, how it might fit in and further contribute to what you're doing at your institution. So thank you for that presentation. I am mindful of the time, so I'm going to give the floor almost immediately to our third presenter, Jolene Schouten from the Vrije Universiteit Amsterdam in the Netherlands, which is the Free University Amsterdam. And Jolene, the floor is all yours.
All right, thank you very much, Bert. I'll share my screen.
We can see your slides.
All right, thank you. So yeah, thanks for inviting me to present in this workshop. Yeah, so I will talk about how I think we can use the handbook in our own university, so the Vrije Universiteit Amsterdam, which is in Amsterdam. It's a bit smaller than Lund University, so we have about, I think, 2,000 researchers, also 9 faculties, so a wide range of disciplines, so from social sciences and theology to law, economics, science, behavioral and movement sciences. Yeah, so there are a few scenarios in which I think the book will be very helpful for us, and I want to highlight 3 of them today. So first of all, I think it will be very, very helpful to expand our FAIR training for researchers and maybe also for students. I think another important aspect is that it can be used for collaboration with other Dutch higher education institutions to set up a collaborative framework for data and software training. And I think the book can also help us in policy development and implementation. So let's have a look at the current situation. So first of all, regarding training, at the moment we teach a course called Writing a Data Management Plan for PhD students. I think we have about 150 PhDs joining every year. The course is taught in the separate faculty, so yeah, we try to tailor the course to the disciplines. So basically, in this course, the idea is that PhD students learn the basics of research data management, and yeah, so that they can write a decent data management plan. But yeah, it's really the basics. So there's not a lot of room for also thinking about how to actually implement the plan, really like fair, yeah, dealing with data. And in addition to this course, we also sometimes do individual events like workshops or presentations, both at the central level or at the faculty or department level. But this is really based on, yeah, requests that we get from groups within the university. And what we actually would very much like to do is to yeah, expand our curriculum with other topics, really going into detail into various topics relating to data management and FAIR. But yeah, the challenge is that the current course is very labor intensive. So we do this course like 14 or 15 times a year. And we have to evaluate all the DMPs coming from the course. So yeah, that just takes a lot of time. So yeah, and also with other data management related activities, everyone is very busy. So there's hardly any space for developing new courses for PhDs, as I said that we would like to do. And also develop training for groups that don't receive any training at the moment. So for example, bachelor and master students are completely out of the picture at this moment. And also senior researchers, they don't receive any training on this. So we would really very much like to, to offer them something as well. So this is a huge challenge. Then regarding the collaboration with other institutions, and I think in particular universities at the moment. So what is happening at the moment is that there is knowledge exchange. So for example, there is a collaboration of all Dutch university libraries. There is a national coordination point for research data management. So yeah, we talk to each other a lot and we write advice on all kinds of topics. But as far as I know, there's hardly any joint teaching. And it's also not very common to accept researchers from other institutions to our courses. So basically every university, and in particular the university libraries, I think they organize their own training sessions, so they develop their own materials. They teach this course to their own population. And that's not very efficient because a lot of materials and topics are very general enough to be able to teach to all researchers. There are of course some discipline specific or institution specific guidelines and infrastructure, but for a large part I think it would be way more efficient if we can collaborate on this and develop courses together, and also invite researchers from other institutions, so that this can all become very more efficient. But to be able to set up a collaborative framework for training, you need people from the institutions who do some work outside their daily work in their institution. And again, everyone is very busy, so it's really hard to get the relevant people together to work on joint training materials. And there is actually a group in the Netherlands, I think led by Maaike Jette. I think she's not here yet, but perhaps she did contribute a lot to the handbook. So they are trying to work on this, but this is also a huge challenge. And then finally, regarding policy, so we have a central research data management policy at the VU. It was last updated in 2020. It now also mentions the FAIR principles explicitly. And then all faculties have a faculty implementation of the policy. But the actual implementation, so the actual way in which data are being managed, is really lagging behind. So it's really, everyone has a policy, but it's really hard to know what exactly is going on in the faculties, in the departments. We would really like to make this thing happen. but we're kind of struggling with how to motivate faculties to set up their procedures and support to turn FAIR data management into practice. So that's another big challenge for our institution. So how can the handbook help in these respects? So first, let's have a look at training again. As Claudia already explained, chapter 3 is about FAIR skills and competences. And chapter 4 is about teaching and training designs for FAIR. And I think these chapters will help us develop a coherent curriculum for research data management and FAIR training. And then together with these chapters, there's chapter 5 with the lesson plans. So that, those contain very tangible materials to develop training sessions. So these chapters will really help us to select the topics that we want to teach our researchers about, and then with that we already have very concrete materials for these lessons. So I think content-wise that will help a lot. We will benefit a lot from that. And then regarding the collaboration with other universities, I think having this book, it just provides a framework. So I think that will make it a lot easier to agree on course design within a collaboration. So we can, if there at some point will be a group working on collaborative training, FAIR training, I think this, the framework sketched in this book will really help us there. And also, again, the materials in the book can be used as a starting point to develop training together. So I think, for the Dutch context, it will be very, very beneficial for collaboration. And then finally, regarding policy development and implementation. So this is basically chapter 6. And I think this chapter will really help us identifying the relevant stakeholders. So who should we talk to if we want to turn FAIR data into a reality? And also it provides ideas on what to discuss with them. And then eventually, I think it will also help us to identify the aspects that we need to consider for a next round of revision, both at the central level and the faculty level. So I think, hopefully, I mean, we know a lot of stakeholders in the university, but I think this chapter 6 will help us, identify perhaps other employees at the management level who can really make a difference in how data are being treated at the university. So to summarize, I really expect that the handbook will be very practical, so and that it will provide very practical support in teaching, in collaboration, in teaching, and also in policy development. And I'm also very curious about your expectations too. So do you see any similar use cases or completely different ones? I would be very interested to hear about that. Thank you.
Thank you, Jolene, for that presentation. I think people have noticed that with the presentations, we've gone a bit over time, just in total, and with everyone's permission, I am going to eat into the coffee break we had planned to at least address a couple of questions that we've been getting in, because I do think that there has been a lot of interesting material to unpack that's been presented here. Also, Jolene, thank you. I mean, there's so much to unpack there, but so one thing that I especially picked up on was I think the ambition to also expand into bachelor and master levels, which is something in the FAIRsFAIR project. We're definitely also making that point that you can't just start this at the doctoral level and then just expect it to go very well. There is sort of a more gradual approach there that starts at the bachelor level that should be developed. Not now, it's still early days, but that should be the ambition. So thanks for mentioning that among many other things. Just staying with you for just a minute, because there is a question that came in. Somebody asked, how do you evaluate data management plans? If you could expand on that, because essentially they wanted to know, like, when are you happy with a DMP?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. So we use a rubric with, I think, 6 criteria. And then we have 3 levels for each criterion. So good, sufficient, and poor. And we want all criteria to be at least sufficient. I can send around the rubric if you're interested. And I think we are kind of strict, so we also try to formalize our evaluations a little bit more, because in the beginning everybody was, doing their own thing, and then we realized we need to align our work better so that also the researchers know what is expected from them. And so now, since we've started using the rubric, I think we failed quite some DMPs, and then they had to redo it, which also, gives us a lot of work. But that's what we use to evaluate the DMPs.
Thank you for that quick answer. I also wanted to invite Claudia, because there is a question that was asked a while ago for her, which is, I don't think you'll be able to answer the whole thing perhaps, but it is a very interesting question. It's somebody reflecting, I think, on the broader trends of also, for example, bringing in citizens into university research more via citizen science. And there's basically just a question for your reflections on how does that then impact FAIR RDM, that is data that is being collected by citizens. So for example, right now I have a sign outside my window to measure air quality in my city, and it's me and like 5,000 other people in the city doing it right now. So is how we're trying to improve sort of the teaching of FAIR and RDM and all that, are we ready for that, for those bigger trends coming at the university world? And I realize that's a big question.
Yeah, thank you, Brecht. And Maggie actually has a hand raised, but let me briefly, Maggie, is it about that topic?
Yes, but after you.
Okay, yeah. So yeah, actually, I was just going to say, this is a very interesting question, and repeat what Brett said, which is of course becoming more and more relevant. But it's nothing that we had in mind, at least not when designing the handbook, and nothing that we took into consideration. Although it's a good question. That is very well worth thinking about. And one thing actually that I think is important in this respect is terminology, because when we did interviews earlier in the project, some people mentioned, oh, this whole terminology about FAIR and this and that is confusing researchers and is in the worst case also sort of like causing resentment. And this is a very important thing, I think, when dealing with citizens, to keep in mind the terminology, and when talking about FAIR and trying to involve them in terms of FAIR, to consider. Then in terms of the data themselves, maybe I'll just hand over to Maggie. and probably we have in the audience, if we have people who have experience with this, it would also interesting to hear what they probably have to share about this. So Maggie, over to you.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that I think this is also now starting to be connected to ethical considerations, for instance, also, and policies, as were mentioned by Jolene. It is important, I think, also to think about if students in our courses or at our universities are planning to collect data in different ways, they really need to be taught how to do that in the best way, not only from a research point of view, of course, but also being mindful about what the metadata they are collecting about the data are, and making sure that everyone who is involved has given their permissions, etc., and are well informed about what will happen to the data. So all of these things really come into this. And I think it's very important to learn these things very early on in your academic cycle, so to speak, and so that you have this in your, that it comes automatically, because it also has to do with the trust principles, and in some sense also with the care principles. So you have care, fair, trust, and God knows all of these other acronyms in the alphabet soup, but they are all important. And that's actually also why we have in our course in Lund, where we have chosen to include also some more data management specific aspects of ethics. And that becomes very important if you have citizens involved, I think.
Yeah, thank you for coming in with those reflections. So I'm very happy we still had a bit of a chance to continue the conversation, ask you a couple of questions. Apologies to the participants. I know we're not getting through all the questions as is custom during these webinars, unfortunately. But that being said, thank you to all the presenters. Also Hugh, who's already had to leave us. But this, I think, was very interesting, and this really has set us up, I think, for the next part of this event, to have a broader reflection with all the participants, with you, to look into the adoption handbook and really reflect on what do we still want here and how could we all use this. We're going to do that in breakout groups. I'm going to hand over the floor to my colleague Federica, and I was going to give an introduction to the essentials of the breakout rooms that we're going to be divided into. But I would then say that indeed there is not going to be a coffee break. We're going to, after this introduction, sort of be moved into the breakout rooms quite quickly. It'll take us a couple of minutes, so feel free to stretch your legs, but there will not be a formal break. Apologies on behalf of the organizers. And with that being said, Federica, if you want to take us through the idea of how the breakout rooms are going to be organized.
Yes, I'll be very quick as to not leave the time out of the breakout room. So actually, we are going to use the same mural board that you saw Claudia presenting on. There will be 3 different breakout rooms, but we will talk about the same topics. And really, we asked you to reflect on what Claudia presented, but also by the input that was provided by the speakers on how the handbook can help your institution develop new training for fair data skills or RDM, or also to push the dialogue with the leadership of your universities around enhancing fair training or also fair data practices. I mentioned that we will use the same mural board, and you will find in each of the 4 blocks where you saw the main chapters of the handbook some guiding questions. So the moderator will invite you to reflect on those and leave your sticky note for those of you who are familiar already with the mural, and reflect on this, but also to speak live during the session and share your ideas, your input, or also questions to with regards to the handbook. So the section are defining fair skills and competencies. So what are the most important skills and the relevant competencies to teach fair, but also then how to teaching and training the science for fair. So how can we practically integrate fair principle in teaching? Then we will go to the lesson plans. You will find there the topics that Claudia already introduced. So really, how do you think we can improve them, and if you have input to give regarding this. And then the last part is implementing FAIR. So how can we fill the implementation gap that many HIEs are experiencing now? You will also see that there is another tab where you can provide your input on any topics that you don't see reflected in these questions. So having said this, I ask my colleague Rita to, and if there are no questions, I ask my colleague Rita to start setting out the rooms, and I will meet you people who are in my rooms in a few minutes. think we are all here. So thank you very much for people who took part to the breakout rooms. I hope you had a fruitful discussion. As I mentioned to the participants of the breakout room I was in, we will leave this mural board open for feedback throughout the day, but also in the next day. So if you still want to add your input, you are invited to do so. And now, before wrapping up the event, I would invite the moderators of the different room to share with us just some key points of what was discussed and the input that was received in your rooms. Can I start with Elizabeth, since in my list you were breakout room 1? Or Claudia, I don't know how.
Yeah, that's fine. Yeah, thanks. We had quite a nice wide-ranging conversation. We basically concentrated a lot on the teaching and training design for FAIR. That was where we had most of the discussions, but some very fruitful and interesting discussion about where and how to incorporate the training into the existing courses and the problems or not. And a very nice example from one of the participants that, really, and this overlaps with the implementing FAIR, that if you can actually have that discussion about when a new course and when a new curriculum is being developed, to get in there early, because trying to get these FAIR principles or actions into existing courses is actually really difficult because they're already quite full with what needs to be covered. So I think, given that we don't have an awful lot of time, that was one of the main things. And I think the other interesting point was, the training, maybe about how do we get the training to the teachers, the people who are going to be, who teach courses as well, such as research methodology courses. So different levels of the skills that different people need to understand these concepts, and we have train the trainer, but train the teacher as well, maybe, as a concept. So probably just 2 points there to concept.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Now I would give the floor to Armin.
Yeah, in our discussion, I can confirm what Elizabeth was saying. So at the beginning, we were discussing a little bit about us being very focused on the PhD level and not being able to do much on the master and bachelor level because of their more rigid structure in there. So yeah, so probably confirming what was said just there. And then probably the most important or longest discussion we had was then in lesson design, and that we should focus more in the handbook on open educational resources, and thinking about how can we encourage people to also be fair about their training courses, so that a material can be reused by others, and so on, and that we should take this a bit into account and encourage people on doing their training resources fair as well. So, and maybe following that discussion into the lesson plans, that it would be great if in addition to these general guidelines, some kind of model lessons could be linked and included. Of course, they don't exist at the moment, but if people would go ahead and build lessons based on these lesson plans, if they could then enrich the book over time. So that would be something that we would like to hand back to FAIRsFAIR to consider how could that be organized, and would that be a good idea to make this a living resource that also has these practical material attached to it.
Thank you, Armin. And now the last moderator, Jolene.
Yeah, so we tried to discuss all 4 chapters, but we had most discussions on the first 2, so the skills and competences and the teaching and training design. So some remarks that were made and that I think are important. So regarding the skills and competences, we agree that it's very important to link courses to the daily work of students. So really try to make sure that they take home the message, and that's easier if it really applies to what you're working on at that moment. There were a lot of sticky notes about the importance of legal and ethical requirements, also to make bachelor and master students aware of those. And there was a good question actually about the scope of the book, and in particular the competences. So they be about RDM in general, or really focused on FAIR? So I think that would be good for the editorial team also to make that very clear. Then regarding the training designs and where we can plug in FAIR related material. So there were lots of ideas for that. So like statistical courses, PhD onboarding events, summer schools. And what is really important is that always the courses are tailored to their audience. And also repetition is probably very important. At least that's what Maggie said, but what she remembered from her time being a student, like the things that were repeated a lot of times, those were the things that stuck. So we should try to get FAIR into as many courses as we can. And then a final remark about the lesson plans, which I think is very important for us to consider, is to provide more context. So at the moment, the lesson plans are mostly content-based, but for users of the book, it will be very good to know how long a certain task or lesson takes. And having links to materials, I think it's there, but maybe we should check whether all the lesson plans have the links to all the materials. So providing a bit more context in each of the lesson plans, I think is very important.
Thank you, Jolene. So thank you everybody, because I think we got a lot of nice input both on reflection on how to improve the handbook, but also a lot of practical direction on how this handbook can best serve your needs, so the need of universities in creating more training for FAIR data skills. So having said this, I would like to thank all of the participants of today, and also all our speakers, and my colleague Brecht as my follow moderator of today. And I would like just to invite to follow the news on the FAIRsFAIR website about the publication of the FAIR Adoption Handbook, which, as we mentioned at the beginning of this event, it will be available for the public at the end of this year in December 2021. So I hope you had enjoyed this event, and I wish you all a nice continuation of your day.
Thanks, Federica. Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Yeah.